All right, everyone. Welcome back, Internet. Welcome back, YouTube. It has been a while. I've been off doing a series of things this year, and now we're back today with my podcast, but as a new name. The name going forward of this podcast is going to be the Autism Experience, and today one of my guests happens to have an autistic nephew in her own family. She's also worked in financial services and also detests corporate the same way that I do. And you'll find out throughout the story today some of the reasons why and some of the reasons, she might miss it, but she chose to move on. So today's guest is Miss Paola Urtega, if I pronounced that correctly, who's worked in the financial sector and has a lot of opinions. So, my first question for you would be this. Were you born in the United States or did you come here with your family?
I came here with my family. So I was born in Peru, and we moved here as a whole family in '89. I was 14 years old at the time.
Funny, I was only 4 years old that year.
Thanks for reminding me that I'm old.
Oh, my mother and father are probably 15 more years of life than you.
No, I'm just kidding. But no, yeah. So no, I was not born here. I moved here with my family. We moved. Really, my sister, my brother, my cousins, we didn't really speak English. The only one that really spoke English was my uncle and my grandmother, because she already lived here with her husband. But it was quite a transition, right? Because it was baptism by fire.
You came here young enough, though, that you could still learn English and maintain Spanish, though, because 14 if you came here younger, it probably would have been easier to at least adjust to the English. Even coming at 14 is still young enough. It's not like me trying to learn Spanish when I haven't been around the language, but I can understand it, or somebody who's in their 20s immigrating to the United States for the first time.
So you're right. So there's two things with the age, my particular age, right? Because I had, like I said, siblings and cousins, and I was the oldest. And I don't think that it's so much that I had the ability, that the age helped me retain it, as much as I had enough time to learn it, to be able to speak it clearly and concisely, and be able to have fluency, both reading, writing, and speaking. Whereas, like my little brother, my youngest brother is 11 years younger than me. He was only 3, so he speaks it, but he can't read it.
Is he in my age group, which is the 30s?
Yeah, he was born in '86, so he's 38.
So he's 30. Yeah, he would just be turning 38 since I'll be turning 39 next week.
Yep.
Okay. So the next one is, all right. This one's thrown around on LinkedIn, and I think it's quite stupid because it effectively leads to basically saying, I dream of working for so-and-so, but in reality, you and I both have enough understanding to realize when people are saying that, you basically dream of being exploited. Please, let's just be honest about that. But what was your dream career, or did you have an idea of what you wanted to do?
No. So, coming here as an immigrant, there's something that, we don't talk about enough. And I know immigration is a hot topic. It's not easy. We came here, I had a social security number. I could not work with a social security number. I came in, I had residency, but I was not a permanent resident. So when I graduated high school, now also understand, I've only been quote unquote speaking English for 4 years at the time. And I feel like I worked hard at mastering the language, and I graduated, and I had good grades, and I, was taking English honors. Like, I did all of that, but my options were still limited. I couldn't just go apply for a grant or a student loan, right? So, in getting
well, because unfortunately, the harsh little reality is if you're an immigrant, you're not going to be eligible for federal student aid. That only goes to natural born citizens or people born in this country with United States passports, which to me, no offense, I'm still learning somewhat about the immigration system. And even I think the whole way the immigration system is structured is completely messed up, because if you go back to a YouTube speech that was put together from Ronald Reagan in the 80s, who I'm pretty sure you're old enough to remember, although I didn't like his public policies or particularly how he acted, he did say in a speech that the United States of America was considered a haven for everyone from all over the world to come and find opportunities.
And I think that is true, right? To this day, I think that is true. What I think happens is there's oversimplification of what that looks like, right? I didn't come in, papers, no papers, legal, illegal. However, we come in and we have to work really hard, and we don't have the same opportunities. It's not like things are just given. So because of all of that, when I graduated high school, my outlook on what I could be was somewhat limited, right? I was just going to get a job so I could pay for school, because I can go to school, but I can't get aid, right?
There's an internet meme about that. You go to school to get a job to pay for school.
Right.
Which is ironically, as I'm describing it's hard enough already for somebody who's considered neurodivergent, but now it's doubly hard for people who are either natural born citizens or neurodiverse in this case, even though, to be honest, I have never liked the way they kept changing the language of what it was, because in the 90s, we first knew it as Asperger's syndrome, which I thought was already bad enough to be labeled as it is. Then they changed the name then they added the diagnosis that I had with ADHD, attention hyperactive deficit disorder, which I also thought was a bad label to begin with, because what I found out years later is really interestingly funny. The education system that we have in the United States of America that you partly went through also is incredibly outdated. But that's for educational panel discussion, which, I'm going to be running a part 2 on, later on this year, maybe. But that's one of the biggest problems is, I don't know what education was like in Peru, but I would imagine it was probably a little better in some regards than here. Most immigrants come here because of the university system.
So it was significantly better, right? So, let's look at the whole picture, right? So my first year, I didn't even speak English. Like, I did not speak English. Whatever little English I learned, and this is really dating me and aging me, but I learned by spending my summer using the little inserts that used to come on cassette tapes with songs, and using the Spanish English dictionary to translate them, and then just watching English TV. Like, that was all I had to do to learn.
I've heard immigrants interestingly learned that way. Did you learn watching Bob Barker, who made it ridiculously?
No. Because my family was fairly well educated in Peru anyway, and because of the education system, there are certain things that you just know. And so one of the things they teach you is to learn to watch the news, because when you watch the news in whichever language you're watching, they're not going to be using slang, right? They're speaking slower, and they're using the correct form of the language. So when you are trying to learn a language, you watch the news. So I watched a lot of that, and I watched a lot of just regular TV, like, I don't even, at the time, I don't remember, like Married with Children or
Married with Children starred Katty Sagal and Ed O'Neill.
Yes. And The
also,
Simpsons.
If I'm thinking of the one with with what's his name, something Carol, where he played Archie Bunker, but I don't think that was it.
Yeah, no, it was more like Family Ties, that kind of sitcom stuff. So that
I've watched some of these shows on TV World actually as a kid because my mom would remember most of those shows. Like All in the Family actually was quite funny because it's interesting when you look at Cathy Segal and then Christina Applegate, and then years later, Christina Applegate gets diagnosed with MS.
Yeah. And so, that was the first year. The second year, I was able to take regular English because the first year I had to take ESOL, and moved up. So there was the learning part. So, but I still wasn't super confident. My accent was still very thick. And on top of that, I wasn't a citizen. So first I had to get a job, and this is kind of where it turns into corporate, right? I got a job first I had a job at a grocery store, but eventually by the time I graduated, I was able to find a job at a bank as a teller. And
so most immigrants will likely end up in retail first to start out.
Actually, a lot of immigrants end up in the cleaning business.
No, that one I did know. There's a creator on LinkedIn who back in 2020 or 2021, she does LinkedIn Lives with another large creator. Her name is Doreen. She was a French immigrant to Montreal, Quebec. And originally her family came from Algeria and Tunisia. The mother in France actually had to clean because that's all in France that North African immigrants could do.
Yep, there's a lot of cleaning, childcare, a lot of non-customer facing is very preferable when they don't speak English. And even my aunt, for example, speaks perfect English. She has an accent, obviously. She came here much older than I did, but she still feels very subconscious about her English, right? So a lot of times I think that's kind of what happens is immigrants come, and obviously what's available, because, and I know this from personal experience, and even in my own family, you can come here with a whole doctorate, but what good does that do if you can't speak the language, or you're not deemed to speak it well enough, or you're not licensed to practice here?
Well, then you have another problem, which is what you just mentioned. There's the licensing issues over here, and then there's the issue of the degree you acquired in your country might not be equivalent to what you could get over here.
Correct.
And I'll give you an interesting example of that. During World War II, we were taking refugees that were, Eastern European Jewish from, Europe, just because of what was going on at that time. And they had doctors coming over here that couldn't practice because of the whole licensing process, and ended up having to do something much lower within the medical industry.
Yeah. So you take that into account, right? And I still was able to graduate with perfectly good grades, partly because the other thing that helped me is that what I had already learned in Peru, they were just going over it again in what I learned in middle school was being discussed in my high school classes. So that there is and the way that we learn in Peru is a little different. Here, the way that I saw it personally was a little bit of a cheat code. You go in, the teacher might give you an assignment, but they tell you, like they hold class and they lecture on what the content is that you need to know for the test or for homework. In Peru, you are given the textbook and a set of questions, and you have to answer them. You have to do the research first. Then the lecture comes to discuss and collaborate on what everybody has found together. So that makes you more of a critical thinker. It makes you a better researcher. And to be quite honest, that type of learning, I feel, helped me learn English because I was used to doing the work first, talking about it later, versus being told what I need to know and then just taking a test to prove that I retain the information.
Which is understandable.
Mhm.
So you mentioned supermarket, and then it looks like you're probably your first job, your first opportunity in financial services happened to be at Washington Mutual Bank. Were you there before they got bought out by Wells Fargo?
So they were purchased by Chase in
That's
2000
right.
in 2008, 2009. I actually started with the name of the bank when I started as a teller was Great Western Bank, and they were purchased by Washington Mutual. And then subsequently, many years, I mean, we're talking 12 years later, they were purchased by Chase in the 2008, 2009 time.
So that's how you ended up
Downturn.
basically as a Chase employee,
Mhm.
as of 2006. Now,
Correct.
what stood out to me with your LinkedIn was you've done a couple different things, but it looks like your first listed job was an operations supervisor. What exactly does that entail?
So, right. So that's the first thing listed because I can't go back any further. But I started as a teller. I did customer service, then I did new accounts. Then I became an operations supervisor. So an operations supervisor is basically a head teller or a teller line supervisor. So I had to manage a team of 4 or 5 supervise because I wasn't a manager. I had to supervise 4 or 5 tellers, um, create their schedules, make sure that we had coverage for the floor. If somebody was out of balance, I would help them balance, run reports, make sure that my tellers were doing their sales because there were sales goals. Um, that was the first time I really was introduced into performance management as well, right? So if somebody's not performing, I had to coach and help them through whatever needed to be addressed, manage the vault, stuff like that. So anything that
And if
is
they were outperforming, you would try to, you didn't want to, but sometimes you had to do the pit.
oh yeah, absolutely. So to be fair, I would do a verbal. I would gather the information. It would be the assistant manager who I would report to that would actually do the PIP. But normally we did it together because, and that's something that I would say that I loved about my branch and my the company at the time, the bank at the time. You know, growing and really helping employees was a little bit more hands on than I feel like it is now. So my assistant manager at the time, I remember her name was Dee Dee. She would call me in to do the PIP and show me, okay, this is how I wrote it up. This is why I wrote it up this way. This is how you want to handle it. So that was my first exposure to that, even though I myself was not responsible for the delivery.
Which is understandable. And honestly, I've only had to really sort of worry about, I never really formally got placed on a PIP myself,
Uh-huh.
but there were times where because I unfortunately spent a lot longer time in retail than I would have liked to, but
Yeah.
that's another thing that eventually I would go into with a potential product, which is what do I think are better jobs for people on the autism spectrum that
Mhm.
make better use of their abilities? And it's not going to be retail because there is an article that was done by the Indiana, well, there was a think tank in Indiana which in the 1990s wrote a 4 category article on what are good jobs for people on the autism spectrum and what are considered bad jobs. Retail shows up under the bad jobs.
Yeah, I can kind of see, especially you mentioned earlier my niece is autistic and um she's great. I mean, she's great. She just gets overstimulated. And I don't think retail would be a good place for her to
No,
stop.
but
Right.
apparently because we have certain types of people in management in this country who probably shouldn't be management in the first
That's
place,
fair.
that who I seriously question, especially in my own age group, how certain people or younger are getting into these positions in the first place when they haven't had a lot of time in the workforce.
Mhm.
What can you do?
Yeah. So, it's about, and then this is like another hot term right now, but DEI matters, right? And it's not just about making room for people who have challenges, not diverse. It's not just about accepting diversity, it's really learning how to deal with it in a positive way so that you can grow and the other person can grow. I'll give you
Yeah,
an example.
unfortunately, we still have a very large percentage of the country that's stuck in the Stone Age.
Yeah. And I'll give you a perfect example. So, as you know, because we talk enough, I'm a huge traveler, right? I love to travel. If I have a chance to travel, I'm going to take it. And one of the reasons for that is because you learn, right? You learn to understand other people's ways of being, living, talking, expressing, eating. And one thing that I heard many, many times was, oh, people in France, they're so rude. Well, if you understand the culture of France and you understand that, for example, waiters they don't earn tips. They're
No,
and
they're on
how
living wages.
Right, and how the French view mealtime, right? You're not gonna have a waiter that's gonna be coming and checking in on you every 5 minutes. So if you're used to that and that's all you know, and you go to France and you don't understand that they're not being rude. That is just not the culture there.
No, because Americans expect to be waited on for everything and basically stroked their egos a little too much. If I was in other countries when I was younger, but even when I've been to a few other states here and there, like 2 years ago when my sister got married, I noticed a difference in how service is done in Texas. It is a little more hospitable.
Mhm.
The barbecue is good, but you could not pay me a huge salary to live down in that state. I would not.
Right,
Only
right.
because I don't like the way the government operates down there. I don't like the person who's in charge, and I also don't agree with their public policy.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just about that, right? So I think that
And I'm sure Florida is a beautiful state, but I also don't like who heads that state.
I love the area. I love, and we've had this conversation before. I love
Yeah,
the trails, the springs, the beach. I wouldn't want to give that up. I do believe that although I don't agree with how the state is being run, and I don't like what is happening with some of our state parks and our some of the places that I love and why I'm here in the first place. At the end of the day, I have to make my life what I want it to be, what I want from it. The truth is that people thrive in bad governments. People do great in bad governments, and people do terrible with good governments. It just depends on so many variables, some that we can control and some that we cannot control. So I try to, because I thought about it, like we've had that conversation of like, okay, would we move? And
I've thought about moving myself, and I've defended this before to a friend of mine who was in Florida, my CTO, who also lives in South Carolina, and I was like, I could leave New York, but there's variables that I would be leaving that I can't duplicate elsewhere. For one thing, my mother's 3 hours away.
right.
For another thing, I still have a couple of friends who might not necessarily understand, but they're only half an hour away from where I live now in the new apartment. And I'm not gonna, the way everybody was able to just conveniently come around and help me do the
Mhm.
move, I wouldn't have that in another state with higher salaries. So
Yeah,
there are some things, unfortunately, a higher salary can't make easy. And when somebody tries to oversimplify, well, you could move out of state, I'm like, I'm less interested.
it's all about priorities and what's important. My family is also here, so I understand what you mean. Now, my daughter's 22, right? Really, if I wanted to pack up and go, I could, because at the end of the day, and this is my personal belief, is not a response to yours is kind of agreeing in a different way. I'm here for family and friends, but you know, if they needed to move, if any one of my friends got a great offer in another state, and I have friends that have done that, they'll go. They're not going to stay because of me. So I try to balance that, and make the decisions that's best for me. And I think that that's where we go wrong, right? We all want to tell people, well, you can do this or you should do that. The truth is, you're going to do what you're going to do.
Actually, I have another way of looking at it, because even he sort of realized along the way you can't change somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So, yeah, I going back to the bank. So I started as an operations supervisor, and then I moved in very many directions from there.
It looks like
in North
you
Carolina.
did loan processing, you did mortgage underwriting. Let's see, what else did I notice? Did I take notice that stood out that you did? Were you in investment banking?
I worked for Schwab for a little bit, and as a manager for JP Morgan, we did have, you have to run an entire branch. It's all the parts of the branch, the sum of all. So I had to be involved in a lot of the investments and generating that kind of income and managing a financial advisor and all of that. But that's kind of the extent of the investment side.
When did some of the corporate side of banking begin during your time in the industry to start to go remote? And was it easy or difficult for them before remote became a big thing?
So it wasn't so much in corporate banking. I had already left corporate when remote jobs started being a thing. I was working as an underwriter. And so I worked for a due diligence firm, a TPR, third party review firm. And they were actually, so in 2011, 2012, 2013, they already had people who were working remote at that company. It wasn't widespread. It was usually the top performers got to, quote unquote, got to work from home. So I started seeing that 2013, 2014, around that time.
When you were still at Chase during the financial crisis, how were branches affected? Because I think you were in the middle of that starting in 2008.
Yeah. They were quite affected. So especially in the way that things happened for Washington Mutual. So Washington Mutual became Chase as a result of the financial crisis, right? Chase came in and acquired Washington Mutual as a result. So um, it was a scary time because we still had goals, like our goals, my goals as a branch manager, my year over year growth didn't adjust. It didn't change based on the fact that we were, that the economy was suffering. It didn't adjust. If I was expected to close $1 million in consumer loans in January, I was still expected to close the same amount of loans in November. Even if foreclosures were up, it didn't matter. And of course, it just gets harder to sell loans when there's no equity to,
Well,
create
and
them.
then also when you had people downsizing and losing their homes,
Right, right,
or were losing their homes because they fell behind on their mortgage payments,
correct. And
which
so,
was huge because I'm sure that affected more Gen Xers than Boomers, especially because I think Gen Xers had probably all started to be able to buy houses toward the end of the 90s. Boomers had already had their houses for about a decade.
in Gen Xers were raised on consumerism. We were the launching pad for that kind of excess, right? If you think about the Reagan years and the 80s, and and the excess becoming this thing we all wanted to attain. It was in every movie and it was in every TV show, and you wanted to have more. And that was the idea sold for decades until we became homeowners.
And
And
yet,
so
when you look at millennials, in this case, Gen Y,
mhm,
you have three different situations. You have those who got their houses between 2008 and 2014,
mhm,
like my best friend who just got married last year, bought his house in 2014, who got it at a decent rate, obviously. And,
mhm,
then you have people who were not necessarily able to, after the 2016 election, buy a house for a couple years because housing prices went up from like 20, and then you had COVID induced housing prices go up even further in 2021. Then you have millennials like me who, to be really honest, probably going to take, and I'm trying to be nice to myself, but the reality is very gloomy,
mhm.
anywhere between 10 to 15 years for me now in the current situation where I
Yeah.
can save money, unless, something like what I'm doing now, where all this eventually monetizes and starts to turn into, an extra income or new job opportunities. But again, you have millennials in my case who we can't, some of us can't even buy.
Yeah. So, going back, just to backtrack a little bit, because we'll work our way back
Yeah,
to this part of the conversation. So, yeah, during the first crisis, right? Um, it came on the downfall or the burst of a bubble already, which is what we've experienced again, only in a different way. And so, from a branch perspective, what we saw was people needing fee reversals and people needing help, right, with overdraft protection and making arrangements. So all of that affected the branch traffic. How can you sell? Like, how can I sell you a credit card when you're coming in to tell me that you overdrafted your account because your mortgage payment and you need help with the $630 fees that you've accumulated?
yeah, you'd have
There
to
is
waive
no
a fee
sales
because I
point
had a
there.
Chase account and I remember where they would do courtesy waivers, here and
Yeah.
there.
Yep.
And don't get me wrong, I liked Chase up until a certain age, but when I learned about and I eventually I was able to understand Chase's for a certain, JP Morgan Chase accounts are for a certain level of a client. Excessive overdraft fees, a lot of those early rules, like you had to have a certain level of income and then be able to keep $1,500 just to prevent overdraft fees or something like that. And then the account was free. Like there was a lot. That bank, I can say this, they love their overdraft and excessive fees.
So to be really fair, is the whole banking industry, right? So
Yeah,
this is kind of where, because I don't want to necessarily pick on Chase. Now, I will
no, but they
say
come up as the you don't. We're
no,
not
no, no.
picking on Chase. What we're basically just saying, what we're basically just acknowledging is they're an example. Okay, the
Yeah,
easiest institution to pick on is Wells Fargo because there is never anything good coming
never
from that
ending.
institution in the news.
Yeah,
The second most obvious bank I could crap on is Bank of America.
yeah. Yeah. Well,
The,
that's what I mean, right? So when it
the
comes to
CEO
banking,
of JP Morgan Chase, I think he's a little nutty, but I don't mind him and he's a little more humanesque. But when you knock him up against, when we're talking the big four, when you knock him up against Wells Fargo, who's had a cluster F of idiots running their institution,
yeah.
then the same guy at Bank of America who's an idiot
So
himself.
I'm glad you brought that up, because the truth is that it really is about the industry, and it really is about, you brought it up a little bit, the corporate sphere and the disillusionment that has come from that. Because the truth is, and I'll even say, I'll go this far and actually highlight Washington Mutual, because I actually enjoyed working for Washington Mutual. I never felt like just an employee. I knew my regional, obviously I had a relationship with my assistant manager, with my manager. with, higher ups were in the branches all the time. But the construct of how Washington Mutual did business was a very disruptor mindset, right? They were the odd kid in town. They were the, quirky commercials, and they were the everyday bank, and the checking was free. And one of the things that I loved when I became a manager for Washington Mutual is that I had the ability to manage my profit and loss. So if you come into my branch, for example, and your mortgage paid, and so three other things were declined or paid overdrafted, and you have three fees, and you are someone who has been with the bank forever, you've never asked for an overdraft fee before. um, I had the room in my profit and loss, I could give you all of the fees back, right? With Chase, the culture was a little different. And this is why I focus on culture and leadership so much in what I do now. The culture was different. So you walked in.
Culture gets thrown in my. I'll let you finish, but what I wanted to say was this: culture gets thrown around so stupidly. It's like we are justifying a certain way of doing things by using the term culture, or then we need to hire the culture fit, which is just another little code word for basically you hire the same thing, not you specifically, but or the industry, but just it's kind of not overused. It's basically saying, let's overlook this person who has maybe the right experience and mindset for basically the same person every single time. That's just going to leave you within a year or two.
So that is a result of a culture problem, right? That is not the problem itself.
Or how about this one for culture? My culture is underpaying the staff and then giving them a once a quarter pizza party. That's not culture.
That's greed. That's not culture.
Thank you. Because
because
I remember saying this where I work at Christmas, but I said it in a joking manner. I'm like, so you're giving me the company itself will give a pizza party, cookies and cocoa for Christmas, but the doctors will give us a $200 bonus.
Right.
And that has to come from them personally, which I'm grateful for that because they care, as doctors, since, in reality, they see more than the corporate executives do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's dissect that, right? So going back to the culture where we started with this. So culture is really what your core beliefs, right? So when I help people establish businesses, I push very much for vision, mission, core values, and purpose. It matters. A lot of people are like, do you really need that? You absolutely need that because you need to remember why you do what you do as a company.
Well, I'm not going to buy a product or a service from somebody who's disingenuous, to be honest. It's not about the culture. It's if you're being a douchebag, why should I buy your product or service?
But let's walk through that, right? If you don't have a mission, vision, purpose, and core values that you stick to, you are more likely to lose yourself in greed and end up hiring and acquiring people who don't really stand for what you were trying to do in the first place. So let me finish on the Washington Mutual thing. So Washington Mutual was about the client. We're not your everyday bank. You're not just a number. We don't perform, we don't behave,
That's how regional banks and credit unions tend to operate, which is for the actual person. When you join a credit union, you're automatically treated the way Warren Buffett gets treated as a shareholder in the large institutional banks.
Not quite, but close enough. Yes. So you go from that. So this is where culture comes into play, right? And versus greed. So this is what it looks like to manage under Washington Mutual. You come in, I can review you as an individual and help you. With Chase, it was a little bit more structured, so much that it was over structured. So whether you had $100 or $1,000,000, I could only reimburse two fees. It didn't matter if I had the money on the P&L. It didn't matter. All it matters is you got two fees. That's all. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want you to think about it. Two is the max. And so what it does is it minimizes the loss for the bank. But that is where culture starts, the real meaning starts losing that meaning, because yeah, they don't want to treat you like a number, but at the end of the day, that only applies until it affects the bottom line. And that's
Right.
when we lose that. Right. So if you I'll use me as an example. Part of our purpose for my company is about helping specifically women, right? We want to work with women who have a dream, who have an idea. We want to help you set up your business, from registering it to branding, everything that you want in collaboration. If you look at how I run my feed on LinkedIn, I have tons of people that I interact with every day that are coaches. And the reason for that is because I'm not here to compete with another woman. I'm not here to compete with anybody. There is enough. I can have someone on my feed that will never buy from me because I'm not a good fit. But another coach can make a comment and they might link up and they might be a good fit for that person. That's not a loss to me, right? That was never my client in the first place. So
Right.
the client finds the right fit, another coach finds the right fit, and I keep moving forward until I find the right fit with me. So our purpose is to collaborate, never compete. That matters. If I lose sight of that and I hire someone, a new coach to help me, and they're very competitive and they're not collaborating, then that culture I tried to establish starts getting lost. And 5 years from now, I can build this to be the biggest corporation in the world, but if I didn't stay true to my purpose, I'll be just another corporation like everybody else, worried about only the bottom line.
One of the reasons that I started out with a podcast is because I was debating whether I wanted to be a coach, a consultant, or what exactly I wanted to do. So the podcast actually originally started out as a way for me to bring on people like yourself who were, either younger, semi older around your age, or older, and who had years of experience and understanding of entrepreneurship, brought from whatever they did in their career. It allowed me to be able to learn from them and then start out with one of the most basic things. When I started the podcast, I had someone who I just cut off this year finally, who said to me 2 years ago, "You suck as a business person, but you make good content." When I actually explained that to him, I said, "Half of business is making content. Is
Mhm.
what you don't is what you're too stupid to realize."
So funny. I don't know if you read it, but I actually wrote an article like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Um, so here's the thing: you have to have both, right?
Yes.
You can make the best content. And I think the example I used on the article was like, you can be the best baker. You can make the most delicious, one of a kind cakes in all of the world, and you can even be a good salesperson. But if you don't have the foundation to know how to be a business person, how to have the mitigation skills, the analytical skills, the foresight, and the broad strategic way of looking at how you're going to grow your business to whatever extent that is. Not everybody wants to be a large corporation. Whatever it is that you want to do, you're it doesn't matter how great your cakes are, you're not going to make it. And I think that that has a lot to do with why only 20% of businesses make it past 5 years, right? And I never quite understood it as much as, obviously I do coaching, but I moved more into the business guidance, business consulting. And I meet people every day, and I talk to people every day who are like, oh, I want to start a business. And I'm like, okay, great. Here's what I would suggest. This is how the plan, what the plan looks like. we'll start with mission, vision, values. We will create ideal client. We will brand you. We will make sure we have the right strategy. And they're like, do I really need a logo, or do I really need a mission, or I don't need all of that, or I can just Google the information. That's great. You can. But those structural pieces make you who you are as a company. And if you don't plant it correctly, if you don't have strong roots, you can't take hold and grow. And so I know that a lot of times the mission, vision, values, and um, a lot of the like the logo, it gets so like, oh, this is just for big corporations. We're visual people. Look what social media has done, how it's grown, how connected we are to that. Um,
And interestingly enough, my buddy who just got married last year criticized me about that this year. He basically made a reference to me long before this new apartment came up. He said to me in the car one day, "You're a prisoner to your cell phone, and the cell phone consumes your life." He also doesn't like social media and believes, even though he benefits from it and from everything that Jeff Bezos, the youngest of the baby boomers, and then I don't necessarily like him, but I'll even admit it, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and all the guys who started PayPal were very innovative in a lot of ways. PayPal starts with your generation. There's a lot of technology that Gen X, boomers and silent generation created and enhanced technology. Gen X introduced a lot of newer digital ideas that millennials and Gen Z benefit from.
So, the thing with social media, and funny enough, I just responded to a comment. I don't know if you follow Barry Katz on LinkedIn, but I do.
I might
Yeah.
have come across it, but just remind me.
So he asked today, he was saying that, what happened to LinkedIn? Like, oh, I see all this hate and fake accounts and this and that. And it was a great post. I read it and I agree with a lot of what he's saying. But in my response to that, and it goes to what I was trying to say earlier, you are in control. And we can't hate. I'm not a social media person. Like prior to LinkedIn, if you look at my Instagram or my Facebook, I think I post like twice a year. Um, and the reason for that is because I understand that I'm busy and I have other things I'd rather do. And to be a little funny, it's the same reason I don't watch sports, right? Like my family, I have all kinds of sports fans in my family, and I'm like, no, for me, I can't make sense of sitting at a bar or at home staring at a TV watching somebody else live their best life. I rather go out and do something that makes me happy and live my best life, right? And it's not that I hate football, but I'll go to a game, but I'm not going to spend 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours in a weekend staring at a TV watching somebody else become great when I have things to do so that I can be great.
Now, I'm going to give you a hot take on that, because a lot of people would say I sit there and scroll and waste tons of hours on social media. And then me and my co-founder, Aaron Catter, who you might meet at some point as well, whether it's on a Zoom or in person, even said this. He does the same thing. Consuming as much content as we do has allowed me to now tap into my creativity and do things like this. I do watch sports. I will be honest, I still love sports. I still love to go to movies. I watch Netflix, but because it allows me to tap the creativity to be able to do something like this in the first place.
So I completely agree, right? And that's what I was saying. Like it's personal, right? I consume, just not Facebook. Does that make sense? I consume, just not Instagram, right? I'm on LinkedIn. And so going back to Barry's question,
I rarely use Instagram myself. I have another plan for Instagram that eventually I'm going to start doing something with. I built 2 Facebook pages. I built a MySpace, and now I took all of that, and I might not have, like I see a lot of these career coaches bragging about how they have 1 million connections and followers. I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
need that many.
It
I have
doesn't
less
matter.
than
Yeah.
10K, and I'm perfectly fine with that amount of people.
Yeah.
I don't need to have, I question, especially with some of these coaches, if you're bragging about that, how many of those are actually paying you as a client, or are you just trying to compete to see who can get the most followers on social media? It doesn't really mean anything.
So right. So and that's what kind of where I was going, right? So we put everything under an umbrella in like general terms. So I'm not a social media person, but I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn because it's my business, it's how I disseminate my knowledge, it's how I connect with people, it's how I build business relationships, right? So it's easy for somebody to be like, oh, you're on LinkedIn every Saturday morning for 3 hours.
Oh, I
Yeah.
get told all the time that I waste so much time on social media and I don't know how to be in person again. Probably the same way you get told that. It's like, why don't you, instead of criticize myself or you for social media, try it out for a day before you start sending people podcasts about how it's bad for you. It's like,
So
you can't, it's social media itself isn't bad. The way people utilize social media is actually the problem.
and the choices that you make. So to finish that thought with Barry's post, he's asking you when LinkedIn gets so bad. I love my LinkedIn. I don't get a lot of political posts. I get a lot of important content. I read a lot
I
of
get a mixture.
leadership.
It just depends on the person. I don't mind the political stuff, but after a while, I just cringe at it.
But so it's a choice, right? So I don't engage with things that don't serve me. So I don't have I don't think LinkedIn has gone downhill. Like I saw
No,
Barry's
LinkedIn
post.
hasn't gone downhill. I mean, look, I had a guest back in September who was NYPD for 15 years. Yeah, he's now an author and he's done different consulting because he had two different careers. So it's completely understandable that when your primary career for 15 years was law enforcement, you probably are still going to have a lot of, certain political opinions that,
Mhm.
you kept, and you're going to have certain things that you dislike. He doesn't like the way the Republican Party today is branding itself.
Mhm.
I think a
Right.
lot of people are not wanting to see that, but when I look at the Republicans and the Democrats from a branding perspective,
Mhm.
I think they've both lost, in essence, their original groups.
Oh yeah, everything is topsy turvy, but um, so it's I think, and I don't know how you take it one way or the other. For me, when people are like, "Oh, you are," or because there's always something, right? Oh, you should watch sports. Oh, you should be in social media more. Oh, you should be in social media less. Oh, thank you for your advice. I'll take it under consideration and I move on because no one, and even as a coach, I can't tell anyone what to do. I can tell you what has worked for
Well,
me.
you've seen my posts. I don't tell people what to do
Yeah.
because, unfortunately, even Justin and I were just talking about this yesterday. We were talking about one of the largest creators who just happens to be a career coach himself, who just
Mhm.
basically sits there dishing out the most general advice ever. And it's sort of funny on this. When I post, I don't go around telling people what you should do. I've said this before on my own posts. I don't advise people go into entrepreneurship. I chose entrepreneurship because, in a lot of ways, it's not my two disabilities get thrown around at me
Mhm.
to justify we either don't have the money to accommodate you or we can't make the accommodations because of this or that.
Mhm.
I'm only seen in one set of work. So
Mhm.
I took to entrepreneurship for a very difficult time in my life to build something like this, because
Mhm.
the only way I would be able to either get employers' attentions or do something more for myself
Mhm.
is by doing it through building a podcast. And I had one of my best guests last year, who I don't know if you've seen him before, Billy Samoa Salaby, who was a broadcasting major in college. He's around age 47. Me and him got along perfectly well. He used to work for Varango, which got swallowed up by Tesla, and even talked about Elon, but that's completely separate. You know, somebody like him even liked me and had a good time, you know, on this show. And that's somebody that I can look to. I've seen what he's built in media and broadcasting, and now I can bring, you know, this over to what I, you know, bring some of what he's done over to what I'm doing.
So I'm so glad that you brought that up, and I think this is kind of where we were kind of thinking we were going to end up for the podcast anyway, and it's something that needs to be discussed. So just like with social media, and we talked about culture, everything gets put in a bucket when really truly there's so much nuance to every single person and every single item. So it's there's been times when I've had people show up at my door, right, for my services, looking to start a new business. And when we talk, I can tell, and I have advised so many times, I don't think entrepreneurship is for you. The reasons you're giving me for doing them, for doing this, it's not this glamorous thing. You work-life balance, haha, like that's subjective to what that means to each person. Um, there are people who come to me much like myself for years. I was like, I don't want to be my own boss. I like my 9 to 5. I like my half of my insurance being picked up by my company. I like structure. I don't want to have to work 24/7. um it just wasn't for me until about 4 years ago I started thinking, I've been doing this for so long, and I've been making money for other people for so long. And my experience in corporate isn't what I believe life should be. I don't feel like I don't want to get up every day and be in a competition mode with everybody and everything. So it changed. And
That's
people,
my why this became my why in a nutshell, because I can't control the fact that I'm behind people, but if I'm not getting the opportunities that they are, then this was logically the correct decision for me. You know,
right. It's
there
so
are trade-offs. Do
a
I
lot of
get
a lot of
paid what everybody else does? No. But do I have the free time to do things like this? Yes.
and the more important point being that there is no cookie cutter, right? I see a lot of coaches and a lot of people who do what I do out there, like, oh, you need to start your business, or somebody will comment, well, I'm comfortable with my 9 to 5,
No,
and
that's the fake gurus who say that.
right,
People
and,
like
and
Grant
there's a lot of
Cardone,
them,
which I
right?
understand what he means, but he rubs a lot of people the wrong way.
Right. So what happens is like, no, you need to do this because 9 to 5 is terrible. You know what? 9 to 5 might have been terrible for me eventually, but it wasn't always, and it isn't for everybody. Some people love their 9 to 5. Some people want to go to work and do their job. They don't really care about growing any further. Where they are is good. And there's absolutely nothing. Like there's this like
Those are the people who
shaming
should
that
not be giving
happens.
advice, by the way, the ones who are content in their life.
There's just a lot of shaming for choices that are different than our own. And I think that that's what we need to
I don't
really.
kill anyone for becoming comfortable and making their, decisions that worked for them, but they have to experience going through a layoff like others to really understand. It's when you haven't experienced a layoff in your life and you're sitting there telling people this is what you need to do to succeed, where somebody would get upset.
Right, right. And again, look, if I talk to somebody, let's say a client, and he or she says to me, I don't care, corporate life is fine and 9 to 5 is fine. I just wanted to start a new business because work-life balance. The first thing I am going to ask is to tell me where you feel work-life balance is failing, because time after time after time, I've seen people leave one job saying it was toxic, but the reason the job was toxic is because they lacked boundaries. So you can leave a toxic place and the next one will become toxic if you
That's the
boundaries.
conclusion that I came to. I'm not complaining about work-life balance. The reason I ended up doing this was because, honestly, the same thing has happened to me in retail, including now for the last 16 years, where I am just not getting promoted. So at a certain point, I had to ask myself, along with my three co-founders, do I build something for myself that might get me to my end goal, or do I continue trying for the same jobs as everybody else? I even just got a rejection for an entry-level job at the university, at the college that I went to, which is now rebranded as a university. And, we were automatically caught saying, so I can't get an entry-level job now.
Right.
So now you're basically telling me I'm overqualified.
Right.
Without telling me I'm overqualified.
So everybody has their experience and their things they go through it, and blanket statements and blanket cures don't work. They are never going to work. For me specifically, and this again goes into this like I don't have a hate or a hatred for corporate. I believe that we need to change. And for me to stay in corporate and continue would be to just enforce what I already don't like. So after my last layoff, and I understand I denied for entry level as overqualified, not enough jobs within the experience that I had, all of that. Um, my biggest driver to starting the business was I want to help people like me who want to create a new corporate sphere. So I want to help people create collaborative, not competitive corporations. And look, I want to make sure that I'm
That's the
really
message
clear.
my generation really needs to hear, which is something that me and Justin talk about, which is, unfortunately, we're stuck in a generation who, I'm not going to say destroyed the job market, but they turned it into too hyper-competitive overqualifications.
Well, to be fair, it's a result of years and years of years. Like this has been coming for a long time.
Yeah.
And I want to be really, really clear. So I want collaboration. There is a balance. Business is still business. I still want to make money. If for me to sit here and say, oh, it's just about, kumbaya and collaboration would be a lie. I want to make money. But how I want to make it, how much I want to make, and what I do to make that money and with the money I make matter. I am not going to sit here and compete with another coach. I'm not. I believe so many people out there need help and guidance. And from first experience, right? We've known each other for, I know, like 6 months now. We've been friends on LinkedIn. Have I ever been like, oh, I offer services or I have. No. When you're ready, if I'm the person for you for in that capacity, it'll work. And if not, look at the connection we created. So there is no loss. And I think that to your point,
That's where I get, that's where I say my generation gets a little too preachy, like you have to do it this way when you're job seeking. And I even said on another creator who's in customer service up in my area, works at hotels, reviewed his buddy's webinar, and which completely oversimplified how much work he thinks job seekers should be doing to get a job. I'm like, while I respect this, unfortunately, there is a way that I like to work, which is not basically wasting my time, doing all these things that aren't going to end in the same result. So if I passively job seek, that's by choice. I don't need to be devoting 40 hours a week to job seeking. It's a waste of my time. It's the same thing that I've been doing for the last 20 years, and the result's not the same. When I do something like this, where I have somebody like yourself who, takes 1 hour of her time to come on the show, and then I can put my creativity to use, then that's a better use of my time. And in fact, here's something interesting for you. Even though the last two interviews are still in decision mode and then got decided against, they asked me about my entrepreneurship because it was on my resume. Right. I decided to put it on my resume just as a way to showcase the fact that I'm working on something on my, on my own motivation. Mm-hmm. And it turns out what most of these people on LinkedIn don't want to say is when you work on your own project, that you enjoy doing, that can lead to other things.
Absolutely. How you feel about what you're doing matters, right? It absolutely positively matters.
Through this podcast, I've had so far yourself, who has worked in financial services. I've had a career coach who was a healthcare executive, a media and broadcasting major, 6 social workers, 6 to 8 social workers, 2 of which are agency owners, started their own, digital and in-person mental health clinics. Let's see, who else have I had? A career coach who's worked for Boeing and now Amazon. Mm-hmm. I had a program manager who's now working as an advisor for another company, just to give you a diversity of different, men and women who kind of come through the show in the 20 episodes that, I've produced. I haven't done it full time. I've taken some breaks here and there, but, I'm being consistent in making sure that when I present as I am, that it looks like this and it comes out like this. Yeah. So I might not be as consistent as, for example, Stephen Bartlett, who runs the Doke podcast, where he said himself, if you do it more consistently, where you're on a schedule, I will get to that point eventually. But, right now, just because of timing, it makes sense to not pump it out, on a weekly basis.
So, it's funny because you and I talk enough, and we're talking today and what we're discussing in the bird's eye view of it all. So this competition this competitive market that we've created, which initiated within the very capitalist ideas that we've built our country on, there's nothing wrong with that, with balance, because what we have created is a situation where everybody thinks that somebody has to win and somebody has to lose, and that's not true, right? So
that's the American way.
But I think it's
I'm being sarcastic.
I think it's the American way because we perpetuate it and because we believe what we've been told, and it's scary to have the conversation about changing it. It's scary, right? If I say to you, okay, we're not doing things this way anymore, and you're not ready to hear it, and you're not ready to be a part of the change, you're going to have an aversion. People are risk averse to begin with. We are more driven by what we're afraid of than what our hopes and dreams are. That's a fact. So in order to change it, we have to start with ourselves. And I'll tell you something, like I'm hearing, right? And we've had this conversation several times. Like you've said to me, I'm behind. You're not behind anybody. You're at the perfect place for Benjamin to be at. And I know that they might feel like it's behind because other people are being comparative in their conversations to you, but you get to reject that. That is something you get to do. You get to reject it and to say, I'm not behind you. I'm at the perfect place. And even as much as the new place that you're at today, right? Like we talked about this for all 6 months and it happened. And it's good. And it's something that's going to work out for you. I believe, Ben, that it's going to keep moving forward. Don't let people, because of whatever their beliefs are, make you feel like you're behind. You're not
the
behind.
Best friend, actually, as it turned out, even though I think he was a little hard on me before his wife got pregnant, I think something changed in him because when I told him about the apartment approval, even though he wasn't sure that this was right for me, he still ended up supporting it, which was, very interesting.
Yeah. Well, and
I mean, I appreciate when people like that give me gifts, but what I would really prefer that sometimes they do is instead you can give a gift, but you can also try to make some time to also bring my name into a room where there are opportunities, because unfortunately, whether you may or may not agree with this, I think the cheapest thing sometimes that people do is think a meal or a gift covers up for the fact that they don't know how to initiate those conversations, or they're afraid of something, and it's fine. But after a while, I get tired of people who just use their money to try to do something.
So I tend to operate in the belief that people are inherently good. Most of the people are inherently good.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes it might not be so much that they're trying to do this, it's more unawareness. So they're not trying to buy a gift because they can't have a conversation, but rather they're unaware of their uncomfortableness with the conversation. And so they choose the path of least resistance by taking you out to lunch or buying a drink or a dinner or a gift.
But
I
see,
don't
now
think it's
when they
purposeful.
become parents, like for example, my buddy just became a parent. Our other buddy, who's been married for 11 years, has a lot more maturity because he has 3 kids and he's a teacher.
Okay.
He's a union teacher. So I can tell the difference between talking to the two, and it's not bad, but it's to say, I think once you've been teaching for up to 11, 12 years, you're exposed to all kinds of different kids. That helps you in the long run, especially also when you become a sports coach and you're dealing with athletic and student development. Those are one of my other best friends back in March came on, who's also a teacher and a coach, and even he himself said there needs to be more done to advance the talk of mental health now.
Yeah. And like mental health in all its phases, right? Because mental, sometimes even now, I feel like the talk of mental health is kind of vilified, right? Like we talk about mental health as is a bad thing, not a preventative thing. We all need to talk about the diversity of the ways in which we think and communicate, the diversity of all of the things that come with us through our life experience that have an effect of how we communicate with others. So if I, as a person, every time I had a problem, my parents or the people that I surrounded myself have made me feel better by buying me something, I've learned that that is a way to make somebody feel better. If I don't understand that you are different than me and that that's not going to work for you, I'm going to continue to do it. Right. So it's about educating and having those tough conversations and saying, even I'll use this example in a relationship, right? I am not a gift receiver. Like my quote unquote love language is not gifts. Mine is acts of service, right? My boyfriend can come in and buy me the most beautiful Tiffany's bracelet in the whole world. And I'd be like, oh, that's nice. I'd be very happy. But the truth of the matter is, if he did something, I have a very hectic schedule. I come home and you've done the laundry. I am so happy. It just means a lot more to me because it meets me at my need. We need to learn as people, as co-workers, as humans, as coaches, to meet the people we care about at their need, not at where it's comfortable for us, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
that makes perfect sense. I could communicate with them that it gets annoying, but there's kind of something that my mother and my and Justin and I agreed on, it was better that I just left it alone, which is what I opted to do instead, and just said, I appreciate this, but subconsciously in my head, I'm thinking, it would mean more if you guys took my podcast, showed it to other people, helped, build some more subscribers, and then through that came opportunities. And then I think the gifts would mean more.
Do you feel like, do you struggle to ask for that need that you have? Like at different times. So let's say maybe at that particular time it wasn't a good time, but let's say next week on a any day you called and you said, hey, I've been thinking about this and there's something I need from you. I need you to share my podcast this week with 5 people. Could you do that for me? It would really, really mean a lot to me.
I could do that now.
Okay.
Like, that's probably something, once the episode goes up, I would bring to your DM. As far as them, I'll try it. I'll try that out with my 2 oldest friends and see what they do with it. I hadn't discussed it in a while with them, for other reasons, because of work and then the move.
Mm-hmm.
But I think now that I started to fully begin to settle in a little bit, it might be easier to reopen that conversation, because the one who was here last week with his wife and kids, I didn't want to say it then, but I think I would probably say it now a week or so later.
Yeah. So, I often go through this a little bit in the coaching sessions. A lot of times I hear from business acquaintances, from other coaches, from my partner, my business partner, from my clients. Oh, I don't want to. What am I going to ask for? They're probably not going to do it. So no matter what the decision is, the question I ask that they ask themselves is, what is the worst thing that could happen? So let's say that I ask someone who I don't think is going to do it. I ask them for something. The worst thing that could happen is that I'm right and they don't do it, right? But if I'm wrong and they shared it with just one person and I grew really appreciative of that, I've gained substantially more than not asking at all. But it goes to what I was saying earlier. People are risk averse. They're loss averse. We don't want to take a loss, right?
Right.
So
no, that one I completely agree with.
Yeah. So if we ask ourselves, what is the worst thing that could happen? What is the biggest loss you could take? So in a situation like that, the biggest loss you could take is that you're right and your friend won't do it for you. And then you can make a decision based on that. You can say, okay, I'll never ask again, or I'll ask again until he understands that this matters to me. Or is this really the friend that I want to have? Or, this is my friend, and even if they never do it for me, they're still going to be my friend. Then you just make a decision based on the reaction, but you really lose nothing.
Right. No, I think one thing you probably just hit on is most of us are probably afraid of no. As an example, in high school, there was probably someone who I really had feelings for that years later I probably realized I was afraid of hearing no. So that's probably why I avoided asking out, even though now the word no got thrown around with me so much, I just became used to it. Like, if you were to ask me back in high school, would I hear no 1,000 times from 18 to 39? I probably would have thought it was crazy. And then out of those 1,000 times, I probably only heard yes up to 20 times.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never been afraid of no. I think for me, I'm more afraid of asking for something and somebody telling me yes and not doing it. And it's funny because I think that this is something that I picked up while learning sales in my life, right? Because when you look at how cells were spawned, yeah, in corporate, and it's that kind of used car salesman style. I remember the first time I was learning to sell loans, and they
You
would.
know what movie you just reminded me of?
Yeah.
It was that Jeremy Piven movie where he plays a sleazy used car salesman.
Exactly. So they're training me to do loan sales. And I remember this guy like telling me, oh, you just need to get them to say yes 3 times and they'll go through this whole spiel. And I'm like, that doesn't sound genuine, but okay, right? Like this is what I'm being told I have to do. And so sure enough, right, you close 10 sales, but 8 of the people who said yes end up not following through. And so that's what kind of pushed me to start trying to understand why people do that. And then I understood. Number one, like I said, we're afraid of losing more than we are of what we can win. And number two, not only are we afraid to hear no, we're also afraid to say no.
Now, I want to finish the episode since we have about 15 minutes left with, did you watch that video link that I sent you?
Which one?
Joshua Fluke's YouTube channel.
I have the last one you sent me?
Yeah, that was Joshua Fluke's YouTube channel. The video was called Quiet.
I might have. You
Well,
sent me a lot
anyway,
of stuff.
his channel is hilarious, but let's see what because it came as an untitled. I meant to title it, but hold on. Oh, here it is. Hold on, I'm gonna click on it. The video link was called, interestingly enough, Quiet Constraint.
No, because I know the last few links you shared with me that we shared with each other were kind of a little more political. So I might have missed
Well,
that.
anyway, Josh Fluke's channel is basically branded on him selling his service as a career coach, and he does it in a genius way with his YouTube content. But when discussing quiet restraining, it's sort of funny when you discuss, how corporations are, how they have a stupid little nickname for everything, like quiet quitting. Oh, it's so bad. When all quiet quitting really is, to a degree, is somebody just doing what's in their job description.
Right.
But of course, corporate, not you necessarily, but corporate HR people who are doubling as consultants go to the media, and then the media likes to make fun of this stuff, and call it, oh, quiet quitting is bad. If I showed you some of those links, you would probably just get a really funny laugh out of it. But it's quite funny that when corporate doesn't understand something, they just make fun of it.
Yeah. So I think it's a little more than that. I think it's not about not understanding, it's about fighting the norm, fighting the loss of the norm, right? They don't want the change. Change is scary for a lot of us, right? Some of us are better adept to dealing with it head on. Others are averse, especially when, again, you have something to lose. So as a corporate person, if you start talking to me about things that stand against what I am, what was giving me power this far, I don't want to hear it, because it might mean that I'm going to lose something by buying into this new way of thinking. Right? So when you say.
But you also might gain something. Like, for example, I'll give you a few reasons why I just got fed up and tired of corporate America, and it has nothing to do with work-life balance.
Okay.
And it's less to do with money. Being treated like a human being doesn't have to mean I expect you to pay me more. It would be, if you can't pay me more and you can't present me with the moving up opportunities that I would have liked, at the very least, instead of trying to overmanage me and stick your nose in my business, you could trust me to do what you won't let me leave. And then, just let me, work my best judgment.
Yeah. So I think that comes from a lack of leadership training for the leaders, right? And you touched on this a little bit earlier. people who become managers without really having the experience. I don't think it's about experience, it's about guidance, right? So I was very lucky that when I started in leadership, I was with Washington Mutual, and they invested a lot of money, in training us, Franklin Covey seminars, and all kinds of giving us books on leadership. This is how I started my leadership journey. And so when you don't know how to lead and you don't understand how to
Leadership
properly,
is not, you can't learn that stuff in the textbook. I went to college. I mean, there's a whole degree dedicated to it. Leadership is probably not something you're going to learn on a college campus because you're just learning
correct,
theory.
correct. And to be effective, you have to read people, and to read people, you have to be acceptant of diversity. If you can accept diversity, how can you lead people? You have to understand them. Again,
Well,
it,
you would also have to remember this, especially in the industry you're in. Most people, unfortunately, came from a WASP background. And I know you know the acronym, so I'm not going to go into describe it, especially because whoever may discover this podcast may wonder what WASP means, or just going to have to go look it up on Google.
So, the
Because I'm
bottom,
trying not to offend people.
yeah. So the truth is that it's about how we as leaders create new leaders, and how do we learn. So to go back to that, if I'm a new manager and nobody's teaching me, and they tell me go delegate something to me with little experience, no mentorship, I'll just be like, oh, okay, I have to do this here. I need you to do this for me because I have 20 other things to do. It's not that simple. To properly delegate, you need to understand how much the person knows, what their skill level is what I'm delegating within that skill set. So when you don't start teaching people how to lead and how to be part of a team, and again, the competition, right? Collaboration versus competition, then you're not going to be able to create leaders, and those leaders are going to take that, all of those bad habits, and impart them on somebody else. And then on top of that, you have decades of social media glorifying what? I just saw a post the other day that I was kind of a little horrified with. This very nice loan officer was like, oh, you know, oh, I'm sorry. This person was talking about their loan officer, was like, oh, they answered my phone call at midnight on a Saturday while they were getting on a plane to go wherever. And they're like, oh, this is why they're great. This is why you should choose them. And I'm like, I don't care how good of a loan officer I was, and I don't care how much money I made. If I'm on vacation and it's midnight on a Saturday, I am not answering your phone call. And I am not going to feel ashamed of saying that. I'm not going to. It's my time, right?
Right.
But that's not what has been taught, passed on, glorified. So when you bring that to people who are used to the old way, they're going to have an automatic negative reaction, because they're going to be like, oh, you're just going to leave your client hanging. My client had 50 hours Monday through Friday to call me. There is no need for them, or my boss doesn't need to be sending me emails at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm not
Yeah,
answering
I'm
his phone
sleep.
call.
I could be sleeping.
If I'm due, look, I've been in management, I've been salaried, right? So not hourly. If when I needed to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning, I was there at 8 o'clock in the morning. But if there's no need and there's no emergency and I'm due at 9, the earliest I might answer your phone call is 8:50.
Understandable.
So
So that about basically covers everything today in terms of what we spoke about, which is a little bit about autism, then mostly about leadership, business, and personal, which will come out as a well-rounded episode. I'll send you, once it's completed on YouTube, I'll and either made it public, or I'll just send you the Zoom afterwards so you can rewatch it. I appreciate that you came by today and that you took the time, and you gave us a good idea of what you do for business, what your life was like. So appreciate you coming by. And when I start up panel discussions again, there'll be a range of topics that I'll run by you first to see if you want to participate. So
Of course.
thank you for coming today, and have a good rest of your day. All right.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. It was great.
You're welcome. Bye.
We'll talk later. Bye-bye.
Bye.